Haason Reddick. He's 30 years old, and he's projected to make 2 years, 13 mil per year, which for an edge rusher and one that could be very productive, that's really affordable. The team I have him going to is the Washington Commanders. They will have 45 million left over after they sign him if they do get him for that contract. And they're still going to need basically everything. They'll need a guard, a tackle or two, a tight end, slot receiver, 2 defensive tackles, a cornerback, either outside or inside, depending on what they do with Sanders still, a linebacker, and a safety. That's a lot, but you got to start, breaking down the issues, and getting an affordable edge would be a good start for that. And the thing I like about this fit in particular is that Dan Quinn has had success in Dallas with Randy Gregory, who's very similar to Reddick. They are basically identical in height and weight, and they're very similar in how they play. And what makes Reddick so valuable is if he can be productive like he has been in the past. Dan Quinn blitzed at a top 5 rate in 2024 because the team was just getting no pressure. That's pretty rare for Quinn. He usually likes to be more of a cover 1, cover 3 oriented defensive mind. And since his time in Dallas, he's really branched out and been more all over the place, which I think is a very good thing. But it still doesn't seem like his preferred way to play is to blitz at a very high frequency. And I think just in general, that should be the case. Offenses are not really going to be surprised when you blitz every play, and that's a huge chunk of the effectiveness of a blitz is, not knowing if it's coming or not. So I think getting Reddick and hopefully getting him back into form would be a massive get for the Commanders. And I think, again, they don't have a whole lot of money relative to the needs they have, but they can fill out the rest of them at, affordable pieces and get a bit better in a lot of places. The next addition I like is Stefon Diggs, who's 31. He is coming off an injury, but he is projected to make 1 year, 16 million. And that's pretty affordable for a wide receiver that I think could be the number one for the team. And the team I have him landing on is the Chargers. I would bet on McConkey being the number one, but if Diggs is what he was this past year, I think it's going to be pretty close, actually. Diggs would, cut into the money a fair bit for the Chargers, but they would still have 43 million left over, and they don't have a ton of needs. They do have some important ones, but I think they can, sign cheap guys at certain positions and be fine. The needs I have are a center, guard, edge rusher, 2 defensive tackles, cornerback, and linebacker. The caveat with edge rusher is there's a bit of a question mark there because Joey Bosa did not have a good year this past season, but he still is a very talented player. It remains to be seen if the injuries have caught up to him because in the past 3 years, every season has been cut short, at least to some degree. And, I don't want to bank on Bosa being the lead guy. So I think edge rusher would be a need, but it's not a guarantee. So if that isn't a need, the money situation looks a lot better because edge rusher is such a premium position that was going to cut into the money quite a bit. But if Thule, I can't say his last name, steps up which I think is possible. He had a very solid rookie year and is a very talented player. Then maybe they don't need an edge rusher and they can just focus on all those other positions and be set that way. So, as it pertains to Diggs, though, Greg Roman knows not one passing concept. So, this is a bold move, but if the Chargers want to win, they'll give Herbert the ball and a weapon to work with. I will repeat myself. McConkey is very good. I think he should be, in an ideal world, a number 2. He might progress and be, someone that turns into a legitimate number 1, like a high-end number 1, because I think right now he's right on the fringe. If he has a year like he did again, like last year, I think he's right there as, being a fringe 1 or 2. So if you have 2 players like that, I think you're much better set. And, Diggs, I think, is right there in that, same conversation. So I do think that would be pretty good in conjunction with each other. And, really, the receiver room, it still wouldn't be ideal because Quentin Johnston is a rather large question mark. Such a talented player, but, drops the ball at a very high rate. So it's still not perfect, but I think it looks a lot better with Diggs. The next player I like is Josh Sweat, who is 28 years old. He would make roughly $18 million a year for 3 years. And the team I have him going to is Chicago, the Bears. They would still have $25 million left over if they sign him at that rate. And they are really well set, actually, for needs. They would just need a center, a wide receiver, and a cornerback, but it wouldn't have to be a number 1 cornerback because Jalen Johnson is fantastic, one of the absolute best in the game. It could be, just a reasonable second corner, and they have the nickel position really well set as well, so, that devalues the need even more. So they are, not too poorly set up. The thing with Sweat to the Bears is he has the big body. He's about 265 pounds that Dennis Allen used a lot of in New Orleans as a defensive coordinator and as the head coach. And he fits, of course, one of Chicago's few needs. So, that just makes sense there. And perhaps the most important, I would say actually clearly the most important reason you do this is it pairs together the Sweat Bros. You simply have to. You're going to deprive the world of 2 sweats coming off the edge. That's just terrifying. So, all jokes aside, I do think Josh Sweat would be a very pivotal piece to the Chicago defense because, he's someone that gets talked about a lot for being a freak athlete, and he very much is, but a big chunk of why he's a freak athlete is because he is 265 pounds and he still moves like a guy that's, 30 pounds lighter than that. So I think Sweat makes a lot of sense to the Bears. I also think Sam Darnold, who is 28, makes a lot of sense. Actually, before I say that, his contract would be 3 years, $41 million a year. I have him going to the Raiders, who would still have $48 million left over. They have not a lot of positional needs, but they have a lot of needs at the positions that they need. So they have 2 wide receivers that they need to fill, 3 corners. Remember, you have 3 corners on the field, so they need every corner filled. A defensive tackle, 2 linebackers, and 2 safeties. Defensive tackle is the only position that doesn't need multiple of. So, that's not great. 48 million, it's not going to be enough to cover all of those needs, but they do have a ton of dead cap between Jimmy Garoppolo and I think it's Devontae Adams, maybe. I'm not sure about the second player, but I know Garoppolo was one. They do have, some players not on the roster that are eating into their cap. So that's not going to be the case for long. So more money is going to be on the way after the year. And additionally, they have a good draft pick. So they could either stay put and, fill out the roster with hopefully a very good player, or they could trade back and look to fill out multiple needs. So they have multiple options, and a big idea here is just filling out, the most important position. You might think 41 million a year for Darnold is too much, and to be honest, I think that's fair. I think there definitely is the possibility that that looks like a terrible contract, you know, at the end of the year, because maybe he regresses back to his old self, meaning pre Minnesota, and he just really is overpaid then. But Darnold was, according to my quarterback metric, which combines multiple advanced stats together, he was the 12th best quarterback this year. Yes, he finished very poorly. So, that's not a great look. That leaves a sour taste in your mouth. But at the end of the day, aside from the playoff game, which counts way more, but at the end of the day, the games at the end of the season count as much as the games at the start of the season. I want to look at the whole sample size for him in the regular season. I will hold it against him, that he did play so poorly in the playoffs because, that just you lose and you're out. Whereas in the regular season, you lose in week 7, you get back in action week 8. So I can definitely understand being hesitant with Darnold, but I think the Raiders are a really good situation to take a gamble on him. I do like that it's only 3 years as well. So, it's not something super locked in, perhaps. And with Darnold, he's going to need those 2 wide receivers, I would say, pretty essentially, because right now, you have Brock Bowers, top 2 tight end, top 3, I would say, actually, at a minimum. I think he's the second best tight end in the league, but he is at a minimum the third best. And after him, Jacoby Myers, I think, is a solid wide receiver. I think ideally he would be your third wide receiver, but he could be your second wide receiver. So it's like, you know, again, kind of like how I was talking about with McConkey being in that 1 to 2 range. I think Myers is in that 2 to 3 range, but I do feel like I like him a fair amount more as the 3. So, that is my preference. But either way, they are going to need 2 wide receivers. It just is, a question of how good said receivers have to be, because right now they do not have like any talent beyond Myers. So, they're just going to have to bring in competent bodies at a minimum. And that will allow for the Raiders to fairly evaluate him. It's wild to say that, a 28-year-old quarterback needs to be evaluated, but he really does. Like, the situation with the Jets was so horrendous that, it was really hard to get a read on how well he was playing. And then the situation in Minnesota was so almost perfect. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty darn close. You got, one of the 3 best receivers, if it seems like I'm underselling any player, it's just because I like to, you know, really be conservative with estimations. So Jefferson, he could be even the best receiver in the league. That's definitely arguable. But at a minimum, he's the third best. You have him. You have Jordan Addison, who's, I'd say, a top 10 number 2 receiver. TJ Hawkinson, very good tight end, great coach. And Kevin O'Connell. It's, a pretty darn good offensive line as well. It definitely took a dip when Darrisaw got hurt. That was very unfortunate. You hate to see any player go down, but especially a great one like Darrisaw. That just means so much to the team. So, you know, either way, he had a very good situation going for him. I think the Raiders are going to be the in between for those teams. I think they're much closer to Minnesota than they are to New York. But if they don't fill out the wide receiver room, it's going to be, a bit reminiscent of the Jets in that sense alone, because Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers are better than, pretty much any player he would have played with on the Jets. So, yes, the Raiders do need some serious help, but they do have the assets to fill out the roster. They have, I think, logical enough minds in place to make wide receiver a priority. And they have draft picks that they can use. They can stay put and draft a quality player. They can trade back and, look to target more of those positions. I think either makes sense. So the next player is Ronnie Stanley. He is 31 years old. He is projected to get a 2 years, $20 million per year contract. And the team I have him landing on is New England, who would have $100 million left over after signing him, which is hilarious. That's just so much money. The Patriots, don't get me wrong, they are not a good team, but they have very much an avenue to become a legitimate team. And when I say that, I mean just within this offseason alone. It's not going to be like a 3-year plan or something. With Stanley, he would take up one of the tackle needs, but they would still need another tackle. They would need 2 wide receivers. I think they need a tight end. Hunter Henry is just kind of whatever. I mean, I think he's a little worse than whatever, because whatever to me signifies like he's like, 16, 17 in NFL rank. But I think he's probably worse than that. His production mainly came because there was simply no one else to throw to him. It wasn't like he was really doing a great job himself. So then they would need defensive tackle, cornerback, and 2 linebackers. Again, that's a good chunk of your roster right there that they need. But may I remind you, they have $100 million in cap left over after signing Stanley. And Stanley, if he stays healthy, is a pretty darn good tackle. So usually I don't like big signings when needing a lot of positions. But with New England just having a grotesque amount of money, also having the quality picks that they do, and multiples in some cases, I think they have an additional third from Matthew Judon, which was a great trade for a variety of reasons. They just really need to give Drake May a chance. He was put in such a bad predicament, and I think genuinely there's a major chance that the team looks much better than they did this past season, simply on account of dang near their entire offensive line was hurt. It was, I guess, not really. It was 2 guys, but that's 40% of the line right there. And, it was David Andrews and, I'm drawing a blank on the left guard's name. But either way, the players that were out were pretty quality players. So it wasn't just like replacement level guys were lost. It was, you know, contributors for sure. So I think just simply based on that, the Patriots will look better. I think I didn't really have my ear to the situation in New England coaching wise this past season. I think Gerard Mayo, from what I've heard, was rather poor. And, Mike Vrabel has a good reputation, so I think that's going to help as well. But, Stanley and spoiler alert, this next player, Amari Cooper, who is 31 years old as well, projected to make 2 years, $15 million a year, going to New England as well. He would be leaving the Patriots with $85 million left, and they would still have the same needs aside for only needing one receiver now. I don't want to repeat over and over again the same needs. So they feel a pretty massive need with Cooper. If he can return somewhat to form, he'll be far and away the clear number one. Like, he doesn't need to be prime Amari Cooper, but if he can just be, somewhere between what he was 2 years ago and then this past season where he was pretty poor, then, he's going to be a real option for me. And, between Stanley and Cooper, you still need 3 positions on offense. So it's not, you're not out of the woods, but really, you get them, and if May does look the part this upcoming year, that's a pretty reasonable offense. I'm not saying it's going to be great. It's not going to be like high powered by any stretch, but it's going to look like an NFL offense. Whereas last year, May a lot of the time was just running for his life. So was Brissett. It was just, very bad. And I think with these 2 additions, again, I don't like adding pricey guys or guys that are older. 31 for a tackle, though, is not what it used to be. You see guys, playing almost to their 40s in some cases, like with Trent Williams. So, maybe you can get that with Stanley and actually have a pretty long-term option that way. But if nothing else, with these guys, if they play well and May plays well, they will be in the mix for his rookie contract. And that's really what you want to aspire for, because these contracts would be off the books by the time you'd have to pay May. And, if he is really good, then you pay him and he'll still look good with, not the same supporting cast. But for now, give him some opportunity to actually succeed. The next player is DJ Reed, who is 28 years old. He is projected to make $14 million a year for 3 years. And I have him going to the Lions, who just absurdly enough would still have $35 million left over. That is absurd because they are such a good team and they're signing a pretty notable free agent. So the thing that really stands out to me about the Lions is they need a guard, possibly 2 though. And aside from that, they might need one more corner because Terrion Arnold was so bad this past year. And he was put in a very difficult position, don't get me wrong. He was playing a lot of man coverage against really good players a lot of the time. And, they were giving him no help because they were blitzing, because everybody on their team was hurt. So I do understand that, he was put in a tough situation, but he did not perform well whatsoever. So I don't want to bank on him. Ennis Rakestraw Jr., he played such limited snaps. It's just a wasted year, really. So I don't want to put any thought into that. But, I don't want to have this fantastic Super Bowl contending team and just have complete question marks at corner because, yes, maybe Rakestraw and Arnold turn out to be great players, but in general, it doesn't hurt to have more corners than you need. And, also, I just think it's kind of unlikely that both of those players, even though I liked both of them coming out of college, I think it's unlikely that they both turn into studs this upcoming season. So with Reed, the fit is so good because he is great in man coverage. And I would imagine defensive coordinator Kelvin Shepard will run an Aaron Glenn type of scheme, as they both got to Detroit in 2021. So I'm not sure what capacity Shepard was involved in the team throughout the years, but if you're the, you know, in the fold for the team, I think you're going to pick up more than likely some things from what the lead guy at your side of the ball is doing. So I think they're more than likely going to run a decent amount of man, but even if they shift away from that ideology, I think, Reed is still really set up to succeed because he can play zone as well. I think it cuts into his value a little bit because I would say relative to other players, he's a better man coverage corner than he is a zone coverage corner compared to other players. But he's a very high end player overall. He can really succeed in any fashion. So I have no worries with the scheme fit. So now we get to the real potential superstar portion of the video. And mind you, I genuinely think all of the players in this video are capable of being the number one guy at their positional group. And, some are going to do it at varying levels, but I think for the most part, they're going to be competitive if they're the number one guy. And with that said, though, Khalil Mack, who is 34 years old, that is, a tad bit worrisome. I'd say it's more than a tad bit. I'd say it's rather worrisome. But he is projected to make $23 million a year for 2 years. So you're not locked into him more than likely for super long. And the team I have him going to is the Packers, who would be left with $43 million in cap space after signing him, which is pretty darn good because the needs I have listed for them are nickelback, linebacker, and then potentially cornerback. Because Keyshawn Nixon is very, I don't know. Like, that's the best way to describe him, is I don't know. So I think ideally you have him as your fourth corner, and you have, a pretty premier option as a depth guy. Nixon, I like about him is that he can play outside and inside, so that's very valuable. But as for Mack, many edge rushers rushed for 100 or more snaps more than Mack did, and yet he was still 26th in pressures for edge rushers. That doesn't sound the greatest, but like I said, he was very limited in snaps. There were some players like George Karlaftis who played basically every single snap for the Chiefs. Karlaftis had like 550 pass rushing snaps, I want to say, and Mack was like in the 300 and something range. I think he was like pretty high in the 300s, but yeah, it was like almost 200 more snaps for Karlaftis. So with Mack, he wasn't getting as many opportunities, which I think would be wise to do for Green Bay to hopefully extend his career as much as you can as well. But still being 26, you are a legitimate number one edge rusher at that point. You're not a super high end one, but you know that's a respectable placement for sure. What is a sneaky benefit, and this is like very marginal, but I think it's still worth noting, is he can also help develop Rashawn Gary, who I think has kind of been just in the mix recently. Like he had a ton of promise, he showed a lot of potential, and he just overall I don't think has been the most consistent. And Mack, I think, would help in his development because Gary's getting up there, so it's not like he's like a 21-year-old rookie, but Gary still has potential. And Mack just is a very similar build and play style to Gary. So I think, he would be a very good player to learn from. So again, that's not like why you do the move. You do it because you want to win a Super Bowl. You have the team ready in basically all aspects to do that. You kind of need to juice up your pass rush a bit. And, there's a really high end option available. Sticking in the NFC North, we have Chris Godwin, who is 29 years old, projected to get a 3-year, $20 million per year contract. And I have him going to the Bears, who would have just $5 million left over after they get him at that rate. But all they would need is a center and a cornerback. So that is, not enough to get both and, have solid players at those positions at least. But you could get one of them probably for $5 million, and then, don't force the issue and just draft a scrub player that, you know, fits the depth chart. But if there's, value there, you can draft the other one. So that would work out pretty reasonably, I would say. And what I like about Godwin to the Bears is he can be Ben Johnson's new Amon-Ra St. Brown. With Godwin, an injury at, roughly 30 is scary, but I believe it was a dislocated ankle. And that is very different from, say, tearing your Achilles, where, there's going to be like an entire season after the injury where you just might not be right still. So, yes, it's not nothing, but I wouldn't be too deterred. And even if, he is not as good as he's going to be in year one, that, he'll be better in year 2 and so on. You don't need to rush this completely. Like, you don't wanna take it slow either because at the end of the day, your window for Chicago it's crazy to say that we're, not a good team this past year, but your window is kind of closing a little bit because Caleb Williams on that rookie contract, you get him for 5 years, he's only played 1 year, so you still have 4 years to work with, but you really gotta force the issue in those 4 remaining years. Still, though, you know, if he's not great, Godwin, that is, this year, you have next year and, down the line as well. I think he has a game that will age well also. So I think he could be, down the line, a good contributor for this generally young Bears team. So, by that I mean he's a great route runner, has really consistent hands. He's not really predicated too much on explosiveness or speed or anything like that. So I think he could be a long-term play, but if nothing else, he's going to be good for, much of the real open window that comes from a rookie contract for your quarterback. And for the belle of the ball, we have Jevon Holland, who is a real rarity in the sense that the two types of players you don't usually see in free agency are high potential young guys and really good players just in general. There's always going to be a couple, but to combine those two into one player, Holland is a unique case for sure. He is projected for 4 years, $20 million a year, and the team I have him going to is Denver, who would still have 18 million left over. So they have, a good amount of flexibility to work with, and they only really need tight end, cornerback, and linebacker. So they don't have, you know, cornerback, yes, is a premium position, but they don't have a high quantity of needs. And just overall, they don't have, super great amounts of money that'll need poured into these players. So with Holland, he is, I would say, a pretty scheme proof player, as in 2022, he played 41% of his coverage snaps in man coverage, which is 16 percentage points more than the average for a safety. And he was really solid in those instances. He also is generally good in zone coverage. So, regardless of what the team is going to ask of him, he's going to probably do so at a rather high level. And I think Vance Joseph will put him in pretty good situations to succeed, as I do think the man coverage aspect is something to really pay attention to, as it's a rare thing for safeties to be good man coverage players. And, Holland, he hasn't been tasked with man coverage very much aside from or after 2022, I should say. But, he did show potential there. And with Joseph being a guy that likes to blitz a lot, you can put Holland in, on tight ends or, slot receivers maybe, and he might be a contributor that way. I know for sure, though, he's going to be a contributor as just a deep cover safety as well, and he can play in the box a bit. So he's just very, very sound and a really quality add for basically any player or any team. So, Denver, they can afford the luxury that is a high paid safety. And I think they would be pretty wise in signing Holland. I don't love the idea, just in general, of paying non premium positions, premier money. But at the end of the day, it's baked into their contract that they're not, as valuable as like a corner, say. So Holland to the Broncos, I think makes a good bit of sense. Those are my thoughts on where the top free agents should go. Be sure to let me know what yours are in the comment section. And also be sure to like and subscribe for more football content.